Ryan and I had been married for almost 12 years. We had just built our new house. We'd lived in it 2 months before he died, and it was awesome. A lot of our time had been spent working on the house together, and so we got to share a lot of that time together, but it was kind of nice to be done with it because then life could kind of pick up with the kids, and we just have 4 little kids, 7, 4, 2, and 1. And we only had 1 in school, and so she was in kindergarten, and so we would take her to school every day, and basically our days revolved around our kids. He was a fireman, so if he was on shift, then he was obviously gone for 24 hours, but if he wasn't, then we all got to hang out. You know, it was basically like a weekend after every 24-hour shift, so we just did a lot of fun stuff. We did a lot of biking together. We did a lot of trips to Boise. We just didn't, nothing really held us back. We did a lot of stuff together as a family. And we were excited to finally be in our forever home to where we didn't have to move again, we didn't have to unpack again. It was really nice just to feel like we were getting ready to start on the fun part of life, and all the business was kind of taken care of. He got up that morning and we had coffee together like we did every morning. We sat on the couch and read through the news or whatever on our phones, and kind of laughed about one of our friends' little boy had just turned 12, and we remembered when he was born, and he was born the same year we were married. And we kind of laughed about that, and he went out to ride, and he didn't have any flat repair kits for his bike because he had ridden the night before and gotten 2 flats and used them all. So he said, I'm going to go down instead of up the mountain because there's not cell phone reception up. And he wanted to make sure that if he got a flat, he could call me and I could just go and get him since he had no way of fixing it. I tracked him on my phone so that if he were to get lost or anything, or if I didn't hear from him, I could find him on my phone. So my phone tracked his phone. And a little over an hour after he left, I looked at where his GPS was, and I noted where it was just in my mind, and I worked from home, and I went on and did some stuff at work, and then he hadn't gotten back yet, and so I went ahead and looked at it again, and it was at the same location his phone was. And I thought, that's really ironic that I happened to catch him going and coming at the exact same spot. But there was this little voice inside me that said, you better check again in a couple seconds. And so I tried to busy myself answering an email and not think about it. And I checked again in another couple seconds, and the GPS hadn't moved. It was still sitting at the same location. So I tried calling him and he didn't answer. I texted him multiple times and he didn't answer. And like I said, I have 4 little kids. They were 6 and under at the time. I just grabbed my phone and I said, I need to go check on Daddy. And I tried not to panic because I thought his phone could have just fallen out of his pocket. So I just told the kids, I've got to leave. You've got to, my daughter, the 6-year-old, I said, you've got to be a big girl and watch the babies. Mommy needs to go check on Daddy. And I just bolted out the door. And as I was driving to the scene, which I didn't know at the time, but I called my mom and said, Mom, I need you to start praying. I can't get a hold of Ryan. He left on his bike and he hasn't returned my calls and he should be home by now. And she said, okay. And so she hung up, and then I called a good friend of ours that works for the sheriff's department. And I said, are you on duty? And he said, no, I'm not. And I explained the situation. He said, you need to hang up and call 911. And I said, but I don't want to overreact. I don't want to call authorities if there's nothing to be worried about. His phone could have just fallen out of his pocket. About then, I came around the corner and I saw all the emergency vehicles. I saw the police car, and my heart just sank, and I knew then that it wasn't good. I held out hope, but I pulled up to the roadblock where the deputy was, and I said, has a cyclist been hit? And he said, yes. And I said, it's my husband. I need to be down there. And he said, no, ma'am, you can't go down there. And I said, no, I need to be down there. I know that it's my husband. And he said, we don't know who it is, and we don't know how badly he's been hurt. And I could tell he was lying. He was a horrible liar. And I said, by this time, I knew it had been too long. There was only cop cars there, so I knew it wasn't good because there was no emergency vehicles, and he was making it seem as though Ryan was still on the scene. And I still had the other deputy on the phone, and I said who it was, and he said, let me talk to him, and he grabbed my phone and walked away from my vehicle. And I knew at that point he didn't want me to hear his conversation, and it started to sink in that that's possibly what could happen, and you're kind of in shock. You don't really know what to think. And he came back and handed me my phone, and he had hung up. And I said, is emergency vehicles coming? And he said, no. I said, is the helicopter coming? And he said, no, ma'am. And that's when I started screaming. I jumped out of the car and just fell on the ground. I knew it was over. And they had no way to identify him because he didn't keep his ID on him when he rode. And so I remember him asking if my registration was in the van, and he took it out. And that's how they knew who he was. And then I just asked if I could go see him. And they said I could, but I had to wait because the lady that had hit him was still there, and they didn't want me on scene with her. So I just sat in the borrow pit on the road for like 30 minutes. It seemed like forever. Just waiting to see my dead husband because I knew at that point there was nothing I could do. And I was on the phone with one of my friends in Oregon, some really close friends of ours, and I had texted her what happened, and she had called me, and she's panicking, and she said, but Amie, are you sure? And about then the coroner drove past. And that was just really hard to take because knowing that he's down the road a little ways and I couldn't be with him and the coroner's driving by, and so then that was kind of when I knew that was solid proof that this is it. My life with him is over. And yeah, so I had to wait till the coroner was done with everything that he needed to do on scene. And then they allowed me to come down there. By that time, a friend of mine had come and met me there. He was with my mom, actually. He worked with my mom, and he met me there, and they made him drive me down to the scene. They didn't let me drive. And I got to go out and walk basically from the part where the accident actually happened is not where he ended up. He ended up quite a ways down the road. And but they would stop us there because that was technically the crime scene. And so I had to walk quite a ways to his body, and I just remember just seeing a lot of things on the road that were horrifying, like his gloves, his Velcro gloves that were on his hands had been blown off his hands. I remember seeing that. I remember seeing his bike hanging on the fence, and it's all broken. I remember seeing crumpled up wheels on the side of the road, and then I just am walking and advancing towards this sheet that is on the side of the road, and his hands were still outside the sheet, and I pulled the sheet down when I got there, and it was him, and I just laid on him and cried and kissed his face and just laid on his chest. I wanted to stay there all day. I didn't want it to be real. I mean, he was still warm. The sun was shining, and it smelled like him, and I hugged him, I held his head, and I just kissed him, and I told him that I loved him, and that I didn't want him to be gone. And then I felt like I needed to leave. They weren't asking me to leave, but I felt like I was taking too long, and so I remember picking up his hand with his wedding band on it and kissing it, and I remember lifting up the blanket on his feet because I wanted to see if his shoes were on, and I don't know why I wanted to see if his shoes were on, but I remember doing that, and then I covered him up, and I covered his face up, and I just turned and walked away and left him there. And by that time, my sister had gotten to the scene, and she drove me home. And then that's the worst part of the day, is I had to take the 4 little babies into the room and sit on the floor with them. And I just said, Daddy was hit by a car and he died. And I was talking to the counselor on the way out, and she said, just be very blunt. Don't use euphemisms. Don't sugarcoat it. You just need to be very blunt with them. They need to know the facts. So I did. I just held them on my lap. They started screaming and crying, and then there was this weird, eerie peace, and it's kind of been like that.
in an odd way ever since. Like, there's just this shock of this can't be reality. Yeah, and then from then on, it's just been minute to minute to try to get through. And I still have to convince myself every single day that it's real and that he's really not coming back. It's getting better. There's a lot of really good days, and the good days are outweighing the bad, for sure. My oldest, however, is just starting to grieve. She didn't cry at all. From the moment I told her, she cried that one time, and then she never cried again. She'll talk about her dad. She's the one that has the best relationship with him. She was the oldest, so she had been with him for, over 6 years. And they were buddies. They biked together, did a ton of stuff together. And it's just been the last couple weeks, just since Christmas, that she's actually started to grieve and cry. And I'll catch her crying, and she'll just say, "I just miss Daddy." And so it's taken her a while, where the other ones grieved right away. But with Reese, the oldest, she's really struggled with the reality of it. But there's a lot of good days, and there's a lot of things that we're blessed to have. We have an amazing community of people around us, between the fire department, our church, my family. There's just been amazing help. So there's a lot of blessings, without a doubt. There's a lot of blessings, but there's just this huge void. You always intend to have this life, and we're going to have 4 kids, and we're going to live happily ever after, and you're going to have retirement, and we're going to do this, and you have all these plans, and in an instant, none of those things matter anymore. You would cancel all of that and give it all up just to have your loved one back again. Well, I have been extremely changed by it as far as my driving. I have 4 little kids that are in the back of the car. There's a million distractions. Somebody needs a drink of water, somebody wants this, there's fighting. I was very distracted a lot of times, where I knew that I was distracted, and so I was cautious about what was coming up on the road. But even now, I'm very careful not to turn my head away from the road. In an instant, Ryan was wearing fluorescent orange. He was on a straightaway. It was easy to see. It seems impossible for somebody to miss him. But with all the distractions in our day, it's not impossible. And clearly, somebody wasn't paying enough attention to see a bright orange fluorescent jacket, riding down the road. And so it just shows that you cannot look away from the road. You always have to know what's going on. You have to see the other vehicles approaching you. You have to see mailboxes that are coming up. If you can see a mailbox, then you should be able to see somebody on the road. And I just look for those things. I try to look for little details on the road just to keep myself sharp and always paying attention. I don't answer my phone. I don't text. Where before I may have been tempted to do that, I don't do that anymore. It's just not worth it. It's not worth me doing this to somebody else's family, because it's horrible, and I would hate to be the reason that somebody else is going through this pain.
Drive means drive. Stop texting. Stop eating. Stop watching what's going on in the back seat. Stop and watch the road in front of you. Drive means drive.